Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are just going to give a couple minutes for folks to join and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we should get started. We have a lot to cover today. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you all so much for joining the Muslim Legal Fund of America, also known as MLFA, for tonight's Nonprofit Department and Criminal Department webinar series. Today is part one of 5 really, really important and information-packed sessions tailored especially for Muslim nonprofits and individuals whose work involves international aid and domestic advocacy efforts regarding sanctioned countries. Please forward this flyer and registration link for today's webinar, as well as for any upcoming webinars to any friends and families that might be in this space. And follow us on Instagram at Muslim Legal. We'll put that link in the chat box as well. And of course, all of our other socials as well. I am Sana Salim, MLFA's Nonprofit Governance Department Program Manager and Staff Attorney. MLFA is a community-centric grassroots nonprofit organization fighting for national security reform and upholding and establishing justice in our courtrooms and communities for Muslims in America. We are uniquely positioned in that we have 4 legal departments in-house at MLFA: Federal Criminal Defense, who I have here on the call today, Civil Litigation, Immigration, and Nonprofit Governance. If you or anyone you know needs help in any of these areas, please go to our website and fill out an intake form, and we'll add all this to the chat box during today's session as well. So I am thrilled to introduce you to our moderator and our speakers today. First, we have our moderator, Homa Han. She's a Nonprofit Governance Department Senior Staff Attorney here at MLFA, as well as a family-based immigration attorney for her private law firm in the Chicago area. We also have our 2 speakers today, Charlie Swift and Sophia Khalid. Charlie is the MLFA Federal Criminal Defense Department head. He is known for winning the U.S. Supreme Court case Hamdan versus Rumsfeld and is a nationally recognized national security expert. I could go on and on about Charlie's accolades, but I will let you all read the rest of his bio online at a later time. Sophia is a senior staff attorney in our Federal Criminal Defense Department. She's been with MLFA since 2019 and works on both trial and appellate federal court cases involving entrapment, material support to terrorism, and so much more. So I'm introducing our speakers to you. I'm happy to introduce them to you. A couple of kind of housekeeping items. We will reserve a Q&A time at the end. One thing to note here, because of the sensitivity of today's topic, please refrain from providing any confidential, personal, identifying information about you or your organization. Nothing fact specific. We are happy to answer general legal questions about the law. If you have questions, fact-based questions about you or your organization, please go to our website, fill out our intake form, and either myself, Homa, Sophia, Charlie will be happy to help address those questions. We want this to be just an legal educational programming for tonight. And like I said, due to the sensitivity of today's programming and in today's administration, please do not give any of that information. With that, I will hand it over to Homa.
All right, assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Sana, and welcome to the webinar, which is titled Understanding Ofac Licenses and Navigating Sanctions Compliance. We have two extremely qualified and very experienced attorneys with us. This particular area of the law is really critical for nonprofits, specifically that are doing humanitarian work abroad. U.S. sanctions regulates trade, it regulates business activity, it regulates money transfers between U.S. individuals and entities and foreign parties that are sanctioned by the United States. And because of the very broad and overarching nature of U.S. sanctions, which cover both economic sectors, non-state actors, countries, regions, entities, individuals. So because of the broad nature of U.S. sanctions, they limit humanitarian access to regions that often are in dire need. And so while they do function as a constraint, it's not impossible. And today our speakers are going to be talking to us specifically about how to navigate those sanctions so that critical humanitarian aid can reach where it needs to go. So before handing it over, I just wanted to go over a few logistical points. That this is a live broadcast and we'll do a 10-minute Q&A at the end. So as you do have questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. And then at the end, I will relay those to the speakers. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon or good evening. Really, it's a delight to be here. Thank you, Sana. Thank you, Hannah, for the introduction. Sophia and I are delighted to be joining you. Our experience and what we're about to talk about comes from what we're doing almost daily. We work with charities, we work with individuals. While we are in criminal defense, we believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and we're glad that you're here to understand what the law is, because all of our clients wanted to comply with it. And we want to make sure that you have the information that's necessary for you to comply with that. Sophia, can you tell us the purpose, specifically what we're going to be working on?
Sure. So the point of today's presentation and the rest of the series that we're doing with Sana and Huma in the nonprofit department is to gain an education and clear understanding of how the sanctions regime and the national security laws that sort of intertwine with that, why they're relevant to Muslim nonprofits, how they function, what to spotlight as concerns, so that you can get an understanding of when to seek legal advice, how these overlapping laws might affect your nonprofit, and know how we can help you, or where you may need legal advice. Again, just a reminder to Huma's point, fact-specific questions or concerns should not be addressed here or in the comments. We're also going to be touching a little bit on in the criminal framework, the anti-money laundering statute in the next slide, and the wire fraud sort of material support, and how these overlap, because all of these issues and challenges kind of meld together when we're considering the sanctions regime and how the advice looks like, which is something that we'll get to later. To begin with, Charlie, do you want to walk us through the agenda?
Let's talk about the agenda. Yes. So in the agenda, we're going to deal first with the International Economic Powers Act. We're going to talk about the current context in Gaza. We're also going to talk about the October 7th Task Force and Terrorism Financing Focus that's recently come out. We're going to talk about Ofac general licensing and a humanitarian aid. We're going to take a look at an example to apply the Ofac licenses, and then we're going to talk briefly about Ofac special license, and finally we're going to talk about compliance, vetting, and when to seek counsel, how you stay safe. Okay, after you understand what the law is, how we comply with it. And so, let's start with the Economic International Powers Act. The International Economic Powers Act, IEPA, is a regulatory act which grants the president powers to impose sanctions. You've probably heard a lot about IEPA lately because this is the basis under which President Trump has enacted almost all of his tariffs. He's declared economic emergencies. And those economic emergencies, as long as it's an international, allow him to do things like put in tariffs. It also allows him to sanction a country or to put in sanctions that prevent trade or prevent any flow of goods or money to that country. Now, once those sanctions are put in place, there's a criminal penalty for violating IEPA. And it's not small. It's a Class B felony, which means it's punishable by up to 20 years in prison and a fine of up to $1 million and restitution costs. So it can be extreme. IEPA is not a new statute. It's been around since the 50s in the process, but it applies very much in many of the countries that we're at. It's in the news today, every day, and we have to think about IEPA. Who enforces it? Well, IEPA regulations are primarily enforced by the Office of Foreign Assets Control. Let's talk about them. Ofac. Ofac is within the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department does sanctions. And we've seen them in the news a lot too on tariffs, but they also do sanctions. And the Office of Foreign Assets Control is the division in the charity that provides for actual enforcement. So they're the ones looking out to see if there is enforcement. They determine whether something is a violation of the regulations. Now, ultimately, if they pursue civil, it's going to be with Ofac. If they pursue criminal, it'll be in the federal courts. Now, Ofac can give specific licenses in some areas, and those are going to be very important when we talk about Gaza, because Ofac can grant exceptions to the regulations. These may be general or they may be what are called special or specific licenses. And we'll talk about those coming up. But Ofac is the primary regulatory agency for it. Now, beyond IEPA, however, there is also statutes which criminalize material support of terrorism. Sophia, why don't you tell us a little about those?
In addition to the sanctions regime, the material support statutes, which are 2339B, along with others, also have serious implications on the ground in Gaza because there are several designated foreign terrorist organizations on the ground there. That statute criminalizes anyone who knowingly provides material support or resources to the organization or attempts or conspires to do that. That includes all types of financial aid, services, goods. It covers a broad range of activity. Basically, anything that's not medical supplies or religious supplies can be considered material support. And so in addition to doing the sanctions analysis that sort of simultaneously happening in places where there are foreign terrorist organizations is this assessment of, or is there a potential violation of the criminal material support statutes? Today, we'll be focusing on Gaza in the current context. So the U.S. sanctions regime has serious implications for financial activity in many countries. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran has become a significant new focus today because a lot of the nonprofits that we're working with and a lot of the newer activity that we're seeing where people have concerns is Gaza and the West Bank related activity. While there's no jurisdiction-specific sanctions related to Gaza and the West Bank, there are the counterterrorism and other sanctions. The DOJ is also focusing on Gaza. Recently, the Department of Justice's National Security Division announced that it's creating an October 7th task force. So that's very similar to like the January 6th task force that they had. And it is being staffed by forensic accountants, prosecutors from the criminal division, prosecutors with significant experience in money laundering. And so our assessment from this new task force and their focus on US-based terrorist financing, they say that they're specifically focused on Hamas terrorist financing based out of the United States. And so we think that this is going to include increased scrutiny on US Muslim nonprofits and individuals that are providing aid and financial resources to Gaza and or Iran-backed groups, which we'll talk about in a minute. Beyond Gaza, the UN administration is focusing on Iranian groups like the Houthis. That's the next slide. The Houthis and Hamas, Hezbollah. We're seeing a significant new focus in this from the new administration. Sanctions, export controls, tariffs, import restrictions. These have sort of become the core foreign policy tools in the second Trump administration. This was a significant focus in the first Trump administration. And so we're expecting, with this combined task force and this new focus on these Iranian-backed groups, we're already seeing sanctions, IEPA-related prosecutions on these, focused on these groups. There's also a new player beyond Ofac. FinCEN has become more active. And this is new. It used to be Ofac primarily dealt with this area of enforcement, but FinCEN has now become increasingly active, and it's allowed for this mass mobilization of government resources and to really scrutinize all of the transactions, the humanitarian work and other work, and basically anything that is going to regions that are under sanctions or where there are foreign terrorist organizations. Something that has stood out to us as raises concern and potentially problematic is that they created this financial integrity fund recently, which is part of the anti-money laundering whistleblower program. And that fund is used to pay awards to individuals who report suspicious activity, and the awards are paid for successful enforcement actions that come out of the tips. And that's concerning because we've already seen this sort of very highly politicized reporting, of online speech to the FBI. But this now creates a financial incentive for politically motivated or other individuals to put in whistleblower tips, maybe en masse, around individuals doing aid work or other conducting other financial transactions in areas like Gaza or Iran, or that, individuals that they are suspicious of online. Charlie, can you talk about how IEPA relates to Gaza?
Certainly. IEPA, like I said, has been around for a long time. Sophia mentioned earlier that material support is about organizations, but it's often hard to know who's a member of an organization. What IEPA does is target, what they use IEPA in Gaza for is to target individuals and organizations that wouldn't be considered a terrorist organization necessarily. IEPA allows the Treasury Department to sanction individuals and those organizations based on a mere preponderance of finding. It doesn't require the Secretary of State to make a finding. IEPA can be found basically out of Ofac and what it calls the Specially Designated Global Terrorist List. Now, those of you who, like me, have been at this for a while, remember that was what was used right after 9/11. The IEPA was actually far more severe than material support at the beginning. Now, they brought the sanctions, and material support is now the primary use, but IEPA was used before that. And it still is used. So one of the things that we have to always check in Gaza, because the list is extensive in Gaza and the West Bank, are whether the individual who's receiving aid or anyone who's being used to transfer the aid is in any way is on the specially designated global terrorist list, or if they're a household member. Now, we'll have out there a sanctions list search, and this is going to be my first of many plugs for next week. Next week, we couldn't possibly cover everything this week. Next week, we're going to go on how you actually do a search for these people. But it's important that you do that search. It's unlikely that the transaction will go through because most organizations, financial organizations, block these. But even attempting an IEPA violation is a crime. And now, we also mentioned material support statutes, and they have broad application in Gaza. And that's because in 2005, Hamas won an election, and they became part of the Abbas government. Based on that election and becoming part of the Abbas government, the Secretary of State back then determined that, well, the entire governmental organization of Gaza, and in fact, even somewhat of the West Bank, is now Hamas. And you can't give any money. And as Sophia said, you can't give any support, coordinate, or work with a terrorist organization. So things were a problem. That created a possibility where any aid to Gaza was going to be illegal. Because there's not just Hamas on the way too. There's multiple designated organizations in Gaza beyond Hamas. They include the PFLP, which is back in the news because of their alleged association with groups. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the PLFPGC, Hezbollah, etc. All of these groups now play into it in their associations. Smaller brigades, smaller groups, etc., which are under their control, are also part of them, even if they maintain a separate identity. And each FTO has several different, what we call aliases. So you have to look through them, are also known as. So there's a broad part. When you're going to Gaza, one starts with, gee, how can you send any aid at all? And so now, Sophia, we've been talking about these organizations, but everybody here doesn't want to fund terrorist organizations. We know that from talking to you. You just want to feed children, help people. So why is it a problem for nonprofits to send aid to Gaza? Even if there are humanitarian aids, doesn't the needs of the children outweigh? Why is that a problem?
So the difficulty with Gaza in particular, in areas where there are designated foreign terrorist organizations, is, say you do all of that vetting, that Charlie just talked about, and we'll come back to, at the end. You've made sure they're not on any of these sanctioned lists, and you've done your due diligence. On the ground, we have this infamous case, the Holy Land Foundation, which represents, some of the risks that come with working on the ground and just how expansive the material support statutes are. In that case, the largest U.S. Muslim charity, several of the board members were charged with and convicted of various material support offenses related to what everyone agreed on all sides was them funding, feeding orphans and widows in Gaza. And in fact, several major other charities, including USAID, were funding the exact same Zakat committee, this group in Gaza, and they were never charged with the material support. And the reason was they drew this connection between the individuals involved in the organization, saying that they would have had knowledge or should have had knowledge of that particular group on the ground in Gaza's connection to Hamas. and that the fact that those funds, even though they were being used to feed children, orphans, that freed up funds for Hamas to use elsewhere. That was the theory of prosecution. It was successful. It highlights sort of the importance for this simultaneous vetting process that needs to happen. Yes, there's what the major organizations do, with the sanctions regime, typical vetting, but then in nonprofits, especially where board members or individuals in the organization have ties on the ground, being extra careful and vetting for, speech, other personal ties, and their own personal knowledge of the work that's being done, projects, individuals it's benefiting, is particularly important. So how NGOs basically been operating in Gaza since 2005, after just talking about this very serious case. In 2006, the Treasury Department created a way to provide aid lawfully in Gaza and the West Bank by issuing a series of licenses that allow government coordination and direct coordination if it was exclusively with the Abbas government, separate from the Hamas government in Gaza. And this was to facilitate, they're all aimed at facilitating humanitarian aid on the ground. And they did that through Ofac and the Ofac general licenses that Charlie's going to talk more about. But all of the major charities that you see operating on the ground in Gaza, they're doing it through these Ofac general licenses that are meant to broadly provide for large amounts of humanitarian aid of different types to enter. So Charlie, what about direct individual contributions though?
Well, we've had, individuals, as I said, if they're not on the SDGT list, and you don't know that they're a member of an FTO, then giving to an individual, and we have a lot of questions on this, or an individual family, as Sophia said at the beginning, there's not a country or area-wide sanction. In other words, unlike Iraq, prior to the Second Gulf War, where they had, between the two wars, they had complete sanctions under IEEPA. There's no block to preventing aid going to family members, refugees, any part on that. However, it's important to understand that the government has taken the position in several of the cases that we've done, is that paying any aid to a member of that organization that is a member, medical expenses, a funeral, or for the member of their families, is material support. That's extraordinarily broad. You say, well, I'm not giving it to the organization, I'm giving it to one of them. But again, they use that fungible theory. So the first part is, don't be on the list, but you cannot then shade your eyes and say, wait a second, this person clearly online was participating in hostilities or in some part on that. That's a license, that has been prosecuted in the past, and I would expect it to be prosecuted again. So it's important still to know who you're giving. Now, do you have to be perfect? No, it has to be a reasonable person. But it is, there are safe ways to do it. And what we suggest, if you have any questions at all, is to contact us with those specific questions. There are several other people that can help you with that too. And if we can't, we'll refer you. But we look at those transactions to make sure that they're safe. I'm going to return to the Ofac licenses and humanitarian aid for a minute. So let's go back to Ofac, because they're, how we're doing business there. Because Ofac amazingly was given the responsibility for material support enforcement and IEEPA enforcement in Gaza. And so they have issued, there are two types of licenses. These are called general licenses. These are licenses, and they're almost unique to Gaza. There's a couple other places that they are at, and unique to Gaza and the West Bank, which allowed the charities to continue to do business. In other words, it said these type of transactions that have incidental benefit or coordination with the Abbas government are permissible, even though on their face, they could be a violation. Then there are what are called specific licenses. These licenses apply only to the applicant. The applicant asks for the permission to engage in the activity and is given it. It does not give permission to anyone else who holds, other than the person who holds the license. We most commonly see this in arms deals, but it is theoretically possible anywhere. Most arms deals require specific licenses to make them because we can't sell armaments outside the United States without specific authorization of the U.S. government. But you do not need to request a general license, and you want to be sure that you're covered by that. So, with that in mind, Sophia, can you give an example of one of the general licenses for Gaza?
Sure. So we have on the screen here general license number 6 of the Ofac counterterrorism licenses. And this one specifically allows for in-kind donations of medicine, medical devices, and medical services generally. And then there is specific language on NGOs that are U.S. persons are authorized to provide in-kind donations of that type to the Palestinian Authority, Ministry of Health, provided that they are strictly for distribution in the West Bank or Gaza, not intended for resale, provided that no payment pursuant to this license may involve debit to a PA account, and some other limitations. So this goes beyond the medical supplies limitation and the material support statutes and allows for medical devices, medical services, which would be criminal material support if these licenses did not exist for incidental coordination with sanctioned individuals. So that's an important one. It's one that we encounter a lot when working with nonprofits or individuals that want to provide this kind of aid in Gaza. This is an important one that gets a lot of use and is responsible for why a lot of the major charities you see can provide things like medicines and physician missions and things like that. So, Charlie, let's put this into practice.
I guess I'm back, I hope. For a moment, we experienced technical difficulties. I'm going to pick up the example. So Charity A wants to provide medicine and medical devices and medical services directly on the ground in Gaza. They've identified a local hospital and a pharmacy to partner with. Is this activity covered under general license number 6? Are you good to go, I've got a license? How many people, just to yourself think, yes, it's covered? Or B, no, not everything's covered? Or C, I need more information? Well, I get, the way we're doing this doesn't allow me to have a lot of interaction with you all, which I don't, which is too bad. But if you answered C, you're probably right, okay? First part is yes, most of the things, the medical devices, the medical services are all covered. The idea on that is. However, what they didn't talk about was the recipients, okay? We've left that vague, and that's always the questions that we often deal with, is because it didn't give a license to provide medical services to Hamas. They just allowed you to generally do it to provide these services, for instance. Now, the devices you could provide to Hamas because that's not a violation of the material support statute no matter what. The first two things were medical devices and medicine. That's exempt, but services are not. So as long as the recipients are non-Hamas members, children, old people, etc., blah, 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 you're good to go. But if the medical services is we're now providing the doctors to the Martyrs Brigade, you're not good to go. Even though it is a medical service and it is on the ground in Gaza, nope, that won't be covered by the license because of the end recipient. So it's important, even when you think you have it under a license, to carefully analyze it. And so let's talk about specific licenses. Let's say you wanted to do something that's outside the licenses, okay? Then you need a specific one or a special license. You know, I've seen these terms used interchangeably. Either way, first thing is you have to ask yourself, let me be very clear. If you're already doing it, don't apply. Because a special license or a specific license doesn't cover past behavior. It only covers future behavior. Now, if you haven't done it, you want to do it, and you think it would require, it's not covered, then you're going to have to apply for one. The problem is Ofac has a very spotty regime of granting these. In fact, after October 7th, a lot of organizations immediately went in and tried to get specifics because they saw the extraordinary stuff and said, there's a lot of stuff we won't be able to cover. And Ofac's response was, everything that needs to be covered is covered under the generals. So it's difficult to get one. If you're going to get one, my first advice to you, if you think you need one, is get counsel. This is going to be, and don't expect to do it tomorrow, and with this regime, I'm not optimistic. I think there's reasons to continue to apply, but I'm not optimistic that it will be quickly granted. So our first part is to see if there is a way that we can do that under the whether there's a way that we can carefully vet utilizing general licenses. And can you talk about that, Sophia?
Sure. So it can sound, everything we've gone through so far with the sanctions regime, material support, all of this can sound a little overwhelming. And a lot of the clients that we get, are smaller nonprofits or very new nonprofits or very young individuals that have just started aid work abroad. And it can sound like a lot to ensure you're in compliance with and not accidentally violating any of the laws where you may not even know what is sanctioned, who is sanctioned, or how you're going to be held responsible. Ofac has issued some general guidance specific to Gaza. They had a new compliance communique come out in November 2023 that provides some guidance on humanitarian aid, how these operate, how the general licenses and specific operate. There's also something we'll be focusing on a lot next week are the voluntary best practices for US-based charities regarding anti-terrorist financing. So that sort of covers a lot of the material support concerns and how do you as an organization ensure that you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing in your due diligence to ensure you're in compliance with that and not at risk of sort of accidentally violating any of those statutes. That will be a heavy focus next week. So if you're interested in that, tune back in next week. Because a lot of this advice and then how it translates into advice specific to your organization is fact specific, right? So individuals that are trying to provide immediate medical aid in Gaza, they have very different compliance rubric than somebody, for example, who is trying to build infrastructure in Gaza. If they want to rebuild something or in Iran, it's different for every single group. And so, different concerns will arise. We've talked a lot about material support and the sanctions regime, but part of all of this is also, these terrorist financing concerns, anti-money laundering, wire fraud. This all sort of overlaps together, and that advice is going to be specific to each particular organization. So, including more about that next week. So let's go to the next slide, because I think this will be of interest into what we specifically talked today with the sanctions. So, like we mentioned, there's no jurisdiction-specific sanctions for Gaza. There are these sanctions lists, sanctioned individuals, especially designated global terrorists, and they appear on the Ofac sanctions list. There are also other sanctioned individuals and sanctions lists, like the UN sanctions list. Canada also has a sanctions list. And so the way you're vetting specifically for the sanctions part of it. Now, remember, there's other vetting that also has to be done and other compliance practices, but specific to the sanctions issue we've been talking about today is you would, for all of the partners, in a proposed project, say, you have a project you want to provide aid to a certain group of individuals in Gaza, let's say, and you have a specific partner. Let's say the head of a hospital that you're going to be working with to deliver this aid, and he has two people that, at a pharmacy, that from Charlie's prior example, that he'll be working with to collect that aid and to deliver it. You would have a partner vetting form, which you would have your partners fill out, like, all of the necessary information, names, date of birth, ID numbers. You want their photo ID. All of that information would be collected in a form. And then once you had the form filled out, a big part of that process is identifying who needs to be vetted. So it would be the doctor, the two pharmacists, and in some cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, even the recipients of aid. That's fact specific for each situation. Once you have all the information collected from everyone you need it from, then you're running those ID numbers and the full name, with allowing for a degree of variability for, changes like in different spellings and things like that. And you run it through each of these lists online. And that will flag any of the sanctioned individuals on the UN list, the Ofac list, the Canadian lists, if that's relevant for your organization. And you save the time that you do that search with a timestamp, dates that you have that you ran those individuals on a certain date, and that revealed that they were not on any of the sanctioned lists. That's how you do the vetting procedure for that specific part. In addition, and it will be a heavy focus next week, we're going to talk more about the voluntary best practices related to the anti-terrorist financing. So that is essentially compliance advice related to the material support statutes and how we do that here in conjunction with Sana and Huma in the nonprofit department. Briefly, we can go to the next slide. So you get a kind of a preview of the other parts that are relevant here. There are, different affirmations or attestations to not working with individuals that have been on these sanctions lists in the past. That's important language for people to sign, because that's the knowledge you would be responsible for. And so as you're vetting individuals, vetting potential partners, this also lets you know if they reveal, anything of concern, maybe you need to find a different partner or can't partner with a particular individual. Documentation policies, other different types of policies that may be relevant to you based on things we've talked about. We'll talk more about that also next week. Charlie, yes. Do you have any last thoughts, Charlie, on closing us out with all of these concerns?
This is daunting. It is. And we all, in the part on this is, and we're here to help you. My goal was not to teach you to be a national security lawyer or an international trade lawyer this afternoon or this evening. I don't expect that. And, you're not to that standard. But we do, and the climate is getting more and more difficult. And I think that there's been this belief, because, that case we put up back there, Holy Land, was years and years ago. The conduct that was prosecuted was based on conduct in 2003, even before the elections, in part, that nothing like that will happen again. The January 7th task force is a harbinger that it's coming. And the best way for a storm is that an ounce of prevention. So I'm glad you're here. I think that the best way, The only thing we need to fear is fear itself in this process. I'll quote Roosevelt to that. It's not that we should give up, it's that we should be careful. And we're here to help you be careful. And I like to say, I'll say on this part, I tell this to everybody on it. When I was a kid, I was a lifeguard. And the first thing they taught us was that we had to protect ourselves before we went to save anybody. So before you dove into the ocean or the lake, you tied on a rope, you got the life preserver, you got the ring, you got your buddy, and then you went out to save people. Because if you drowned yourself, you didn't save anyone. And that's true in Gaza too. And we're here to help you get the rope, get the life preserver, get the life ring, and get ready to go out there, because we very much support your work. You are needed more than you have ever been. And we don't want you to quit. We want you to be educated, be armed, and be prepared. With that, we'll take your questions.
Thank you for that. That was excellent. It was informative and eye-opening. And I feel like it's also very daunting, and it makes it feel like, but you guys made it feel like it's possible, right? It's possible. There are steps you can take, right, to do it. So the first question is, how often should a sanctioned organization re-vet their partners, considering I get pinged by Ofac, updates almost every day saying the sanctions list is changing and it's a shifting thing. So how often should the re-vetting take place?
You want to take that, Sophia, or want me to take it?
I think you were going to take that one.
Okay. That's a great question. Here's my first part: is you need to re-vet when something materially changes. You need to stay informed. So first part is, you don't just look at those forms, throw them in a drawer, and never look at them again. The first thing that you should be doing is those pings that you get from Ofac, and every organization doing there should be there. Have somebody read them on a daily basis and say, could this apply to us? Let's check the new names and see if that's anywhere close or could be any of our partners. If the answer is no, you don't have to have them refill it out, because Ofac did it. Otherwise, all you're going to do is fill out paper. Now, does that mean we never have to go recheck them? No. If there is material change in their structure or on the ground, it always has to be revetted. In other words, if you change what you're doing, you change who's doing it, or you change where you're doing it, it has to be revetted. Just because we did it last week here in this location, utilizing these people, if we have a change in staff. So it's very important that you stay in constant contact with your on-the-ground partners and insist that if they're going to make a change, they often do, the necessities on the ground. We have never had an experience where the players have stayed the same, not once. They change all the time. And the people in the US stay the same. The people in Gaza do not. And when that happens, then we'll have to re-vet for any additions onto it. So there's not a hard and fast rule. There's, hey, have things changed? Are we doing differently than we thought when we went through this process first? Or does the government now seem to do it? If the government has impacted, if one of those names say, you don't re-vet, you stop. You stop. And then start all over. By stop, I don't mean we continue to, we'll re-vet them, but we'll continue to send the aid. Stop sending the aid that day. And it's always best. And I've been on the call with some difficult calls where we've said stop based on a report or based on something that came out. But we are also very confident that if those people come looking, we can show that they stopped immediately and re-vetted. We were able to restart most, not all.
Charlie, I actually just wanted to add to that real quick, if you don't mind. In our experience, we've also had, not only have you told clients to stop, but you've done a vetting of the board members, for example, and you've had a client where you had to advise that a particular board member perhaps step down as well, based on his or her connections with Hamas or concerning people on the ground in Gaza as well. So those are things that, you guys look for in your criminal defense department. I just wanted to plug a little bit for those who may not know kind of how we work together as well. I gave a brief little intro of MLFA and our departments earlier when I did the introductions, but for those who may be new to MLFA, one of the unique things, services, pro bono services that we provide is a nonprofit legal screening. So if your Muslim nonprofit organization comes to us, Huma and I will provide a governance, risk, compliance, legal screening where we look at all of your internal documents to make sure you're good from the inside out. We, assess and review your state or depending on your state, but your state and federal compliance, making sure you're, compliant with the IRS regulations according to your status, whether that's 501c3, 501c4. And then at the same time, if we, see early on that your organization is doing work abroad in one of the sanctioned countries that, we mentioned earlier, then Charlie and Sophia also get in on the client as well. So we're almost like you're getting two parallel services with MLFA. We're doing your internal health check, if you will, and then Charlie and Sophia are also making sure any work that you're doing abroad, or even Sophia, and this, you might mention this in one of your later presentations, even work that organizations might be doing domestically, advocating for issues and causes in sanctioned countries that could also fall under material support. She'll probably go over that next week, but it's not just organizations who are doing work abroad. It's also, could affect organizations who are doing some advocacy work here domestically on the ground. So it's really a unique service. Please, again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Don't put anything specific. We're happy. We provided our email addresses. We're happy to help you answer any questions that you may have. But I did want to, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I did want to kind of plug that for those
I want to come back
who may not know just how special MLFA is in that regard with how we help our Muslim nonprofit organizations. Homa, I'll give it back to you.
I want to plug back on top of that. You guys know something.
Do all the plugging.
Yes, is that Sophia and I have been doing this, I've been doing this for a long time, and it's becoming a long time. And here's what we know. We know that when they're after the investigation, that most of the investigations will ultimately drill a dry hole because you all don't want to support. They'll make all kinds of terrorism claims and then drill, but they'll look for something else to take a regulatory act on. They will go to page. I cannot tell you the number of times we end up on whether it's a false statement or, for organizations, a governance problem or the failure to file this form. They are looking for something. And when they cannot make the terrorism case stick, then they will absolutely look at the rest. So it's important to be in great health everywhere because they will say, well, we couldn't, these terrorists, we shut them down. And of course, that's horrible plug. The people of Gaza lose. And it was all over not filing 3 forms or failing to maintain board minutes or something like that. So it's extraordinarily important that you do both. You got to be healthy. You got to get your physical before you become the lifeguard. So it's really important. And we love working with Sana because it is a comprehensive service.
It really is. And that's one of the things Charlie always says too, is that and Sophia, I know both of you always say that your kind of the legal advice that you're giving to the nonprofits is only as good as the internal legal screening that we've done, right? That Homa and I have done. So your advice is great and everything, but if you're not compliant on our side, meaning kind of the internal legal screening side, if you're not filing the forms that you're supposed to be filing, you could be totally compliant on the Ofac side and the vetting side, but if you're not compliant on our side, then there's a problem. So it's very much, we work very closely together on these clients who come through and just, are in need of both of our services.
It's so true. And also for Muslim nonprofits, a lot of them, they really need that compliance training, the full screening, because a lot just don't know what are the best practices, what policies they need to have. And Sana and Huma do a really excellent job of it in a way that's actually accessible and usable by our nonprofits. And it's more important than ever with all of these, sort of new attacks we're seeing on our nonprofits to have their services, take it seriously. And I think it's a really unique service that MLFA offers.
Yeah, it's important, especially in the current climate. The end of last year, we saw the House Ways and Means Committee released a statement that said, ask state attorney generals to actually start looking into nonprofits that were providing material support, or nonprofits that were, fell into that category. So it's really just a signaling that we're going to be looked at more carefully. And so we just have to make sure we understand what our compliance requirements are. So I actually had a question to bounce off of what Charlie had said in terms of vetting. So what type of reporting should an organization require then of their grantees? So if there's like a change in leadership, is it the onus on the grantee, or is there quarterly or biannual reporting, or something that an organization should require with its people on the ground?
Sophia, you want that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really fact specific for each organization, what their project is. There is no mandatory, you have to be doing it, every quarter, but with how frequently things are changing now, especially in places like Gaza, or, with these ever-changing sanctions around Iran and the Iran-backed groups, right? Remember, there's a Gaza overlap there, because the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah are all considered Iran-backed and are covered by this new Iran focus, but a lot of that sort of converges with the Gaza and Gaza-related activity. And so quarterly updating anytime there's a material change, if one of your partners changes, any change in leadership, any change in the project on the ground. We have individuals that are operating humanitarian projects on the ground in Gaza, and because of the nature of the situation, sometimes their partners suddenly change. Sometimes one project has to totally cease. Sometimes the need for a new project, appears overnight, and that vetting has to be either redone, done very quickly. This is all very fluid, and so for each organization, it'll be different. A large organization that has been operating there for a long time and is very limited to, say, there are some that only provide medical supplies, right? And we all have seen some of the major organizations that focus just on medical supplies. And the reason for that is that medical supplies are covered by everything. They're not a sanctions violation. They are not material support. They are 100% safe. It really doesn't matter who gets their hands on your medical supplies. And so, to the extent there's changes, in partners and stuff there, that's less of a concern. So it's fact specific because of how often these things are changing, depending on your project. Probably quarterly updates are important if it's outside of, what we were just talking about. But for each project, each group, it's going to be a thing we want to reach out, talk to an attorney, have an attorney, ask Sana or Huma or Charlie and I, and we'll be able to give you more tailored advice to your specific situation. You're muted, Huma.
Sorry about that. We have a question from somebody in the audience, and I think we all remember earlier this year when Elon Musk posted about those 4 or 5 Muslim charities, targeting them specifically by name and linking and stating that they had ties to terrorist organizations without any foundation. The question is, how should a nonprofit go about correcting that statement if a public statement is made about them that's inaccurate?
This is one in the general. This is going to be a classic. Again, it depends. Each one on the part is, I think the first thing is you want immediate, both a legal and a PR help. I understand the difficulty on the PR. There's the first question. Do I want to answer that question? Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's absolutely essential. On the other hand, it may be sufficient to simply just say in a general denial. That's inaccurate and politically motivated and unfortunate. It is, on the other hand, depending on where it comes from, you may be inviting yourself to get an invitation to come down and testify or other parts on it. In any sense, my first part is when that happens, you are in crisis, you need a lawyer and you need a PR specialist. And, because the PR specialist answers the question, okay, how does this affect our donors and our mission? The lawyer says, how does this affect our legal position? And so I'm not going to give an absolute because it's going to be a depends, but it does need to be responded to. And I suspect we're going to get more of it. If the House bill that was up before committee and markup comes through, everybody's going to make an allegation. This administration is right now. The strangest thing for Muslims is if I'm a Muslim in America, I'm sure glad Harvard's being attacked on its tax status because it's good to be in good company. But we're going to need to be able to respond in ways beyond. I think that the biggest part is where we have audits and where we are transparent. We point to the fact that we have audits and we're transparent. And we file it with the IRS, and we provided everything about what we do. That comes back to that reporting. You want to be able to show your work at a moment's notice. All good nonprofits can. They can. And this is an area where you want to be transparent and where you can say is, I don't know where they got that idea. They might have got us mixed up with somebody else because we're completely transparent. This is what we're doing. This is exactly what we're doing. And we've published it all along.
Thank you for that.
Huma, were there any other questions? I think we might be wrapping it up. It's 2 minutes past the hour. So I want to give everyone an opportunity for any quick 30-second final thoughts so that we don't take up too much of anyone's time.
I think that's it in terms of questions. That's it in terms of questions. In terms of final thoughts, I feel like what Charlie and Sophia have said is a great starting point for every organization to understand that there is, U.S. sanctions are there. It is something that you have to comply with, and it's a learning process. You have to learn how to comply, and then you have to document your compliance. And I think they did a great job of laying that out for us.
Well, please join us on May 27th. I included the registration link. For that one, we're going to be going more over what is material support and how to prove it. And I know Sophia and Charlie will do another excellent job with that one. Come with questions if you have, and share with anyone else who is doing the good work and fighting the good fight. So with that, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.